My name is Virge Santos. I work for Radware, which is a cybersecurity company specializing in DDoS and application security. In the room also, I have Steven with me, and I got Andy back there as well. So if you have any questions afterwards, please feel free to basically stop any questions. So basically, we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the changes that we're seeing in attacks that are occurring today. From where we was from a ransom base more to a ideology change. We're going to talk a little bit about recent attacks that we have seen, right? We'll also talk a little bit about this new threat that, that is consistent that we're hearing across all the sessions, which is basically that the application layer is what's starting to get more attacked. And the reason for that, and then we'll just summarize. So what are we seeing? So around the time of the conflict that broke out between Russia and the Ukraine, we saw a big mass change in the number of attacks that changed from a ransomware. And we were getting a lot of calls on people being attacked that were demanding some ransom in order to stop a DDoS attack, to ones that were ideology, right? So people were basically starting to attack because they didn't agree with the political views of a country, or they basically didn't believe that they were, they had some kind of religious difference, right? So this is what we saw. What we also saw is that the attackers were smaller groups. There were few individuals that basically were kept kind of secret. They didn't actually advertise about their attacks that they were doing, because really their target was monetary. They just wanted to get paid. They wanted to keep it quiet under the radar because that was good for business. This new group that are basically now, politically motivated or religiously motivated, what the difference is they're actually announcing it, right? One of the biggest announcements we saw was one of the groups, Killnet, right? Basically, which was a pro-Russian attacker group, announced the attacks on healthcare systems around Western Europe and the United States and Canada. We saw them also advertising, attacking, the airport systems, right? These had real impacts on, on people's lives, right? So they also have lots of followers, right? You see some of these groups have followers of, 40,000, 50,000, 100,000. And then they ask their followers to help contribute in the attack. And sometimes they even compensate them if they're successful. So one of the key things that we also saw is that some of these groups are actually state sponsored, right? So we've heard about this. We've heard of some countries such as North Korea doing a lot of this ransom DDoS attacks, but now we're seeing other and more countries doing it from a political point of view, right? So it's a cyber warfare, not only is it physical warfare. What does that mean by having sponsorship from a government organization? It kind of means that, number one, you act with impunity, right? There's no consequences. Nobody's going to basically go after you. There's not going to be any police after you. So that gives you a little bit of freedom there. As well, it also means that you have additional resources. You might have extra money to buy extra services, right? Although AWS is doing a lot of work on protecting against DDoS attacks, some of the recent attacks we've seen, the hackers have gone from using IoT devices to launch these attacks to basically moving to using cloud-based systems, right? Either they buy the services, right? We had one that bought, basically bought IBM's cloud. I think it was 61 servers, launched a massive attack. Another one are using, OHV, right? So you see all these different types of attacks coming from the cloud. And we could see that. And the way we know that is by looking at the source IP address information. So let's take a look at a few different attacks, right? So prior to the war now happening in Israel, we used to see major attacks going to countries like India, right? Attacks like the United States, Ukraine, Poland, right? So we saw a lot of attacks occurring to these countries. What were they attacking? Like I said, because this is politically or religiously motivated, they were attacking government websites are the number one. That's the common theme, right? We also see that they're going after healthcare systems, right? Although it's not number two, it's still on the top five, right? So this is critical, right? So and so what we're seeing is basically that this shift in this attack vector. And when your motivation is political or religious, it's hard to reason and it's hard to get them to basically stop you, right? A DDoS, a ransom DDoS, you can't pay it, although we never suggest you do that, but you can't pay it to stop. But when it's political, really motivated, how do you stop something like that, right? So let's start looking at what we saw in Ukraine. So we're protecting some of the Ukraine government services. And this is our analysis of what we saw in the last 18 months, right? Number one, we saw at the beginning of the war, we saw basically really large, massive attacks, right? So up to 400 gigs of attacks lasting for hours on time. What was different here in this attack, opposed to some other attacks that we have seen, is the fact that they were using a lot of different threat vectors. Why is that important? Threat vectors make it more complicated. The more threat vectors there are, the harder it is for a team to mitigate. If you're doing it manually, it's a much harder. So that was the first thing we saw. We then saw a massive, bot attack going across their sites. That was our second wave. And then our third wave, we saw them really trying to exfiltrate some data from their websites. So this is pretty traditional, other than the fact that we saw a massive number of phishing attacks. What we saw at the beginning of 2023 was this new layer 7 that my colleagues here have talked about, attacks that we're seeing, right? This is a massive RPS, request per second, that we're saw, right? Encrypted traffic that we're basically much harder for any traditional DDoS solutions to protect against. So what are we seeing today, right? So this data I got last week from our team, from our ERT team, right? So what did we see here? The number of attacks now, the number one country since October 7th being attacked right now is Israel. Threefold attack compared to the next year's country, right? What type of attacks we've seen? Number one, we're seeing in Telegram, right? So remember, these groups are doing this because they want to basically, cause some harm. They want to announce what they do. They actually not only do they announce, but they take it down and announce exactly how to prove that those sites are down, right? So we see this in Telegram. What we saw, at Radware ourselves, is saw basically a few of our customers that are here. So one customer that has about a 90 gig or over 90 gig attack, right? Now that doesn't seem a lot compared to, the Ukraine government that had a 400 gig attack, or some attacks that AWS has seen over 2 terabits. I think you guys seen over 2 terabits stack. But remember, a company's connection to the internet might be 10 gigs, right? That's a pretty decent sized internet connection. So a 90 gig attack or a 40 gig attack, both of them are going to take, a company's website and all their services offline, right? Unless they have some types of protection. And you'll see little spikes, right? This is something you also see, right? When a large attack occurs, that's not the first time they've attacked an organization, right? What they've done is they've done reconnaissance. They've done smaller attacks to see if they're going to be successful. And once they have everything set up, then they go and do that massive attack. Another organization we saw 650 requests per second, right? Going to their servers. Now, it's hard to compare because, we know these massive websites, they should be able to, scale to hundreds of thousands of, concurrent connections. You have to remember that the hardest taxing part on a server is when it's establishing a connection. So, for example, an HTTPS flood attack, right, takes advantage of the fact that the client processes less information than the server needs to process, right? It's about 7 to 10 times more for the server. So one small, a few set of connections can put a lot of taxing on the server. Same thing for a request per second. That's what's occurring, right? You're establishing those sessions. It's very intensive. A typical server might have 5,000 requests per second on average. So even if you build your solution to basically be able to scale to, 5 times, like, let's say in your exam for Matthew, where you're saying that you have certain times of the year that you have maybe 4 times, 5 times the volume of coming in of traffic. Even if you build it 4 or 5 times larger, 650,000 requests per second coming in, even requests that come in, there's a lot more than that. Right? And when you're talking about if your service is in the cloud and you're using auto scaling services, you have a low bandwidth and a high bandwidth that you usually put on your auto scaling. So you're not going to be able to protect the service using things like this auto scaling, right? But we have to find other things. But looking at some of the attack vectors, you can see here, a lot of it, traditional standard DDoS attacks, we still see, right? UDP flood attack, DNS attacks. We see a lot of thin attacks, a lot of this, right? But once again, this is the new part, right? So if you look at the top right there, we're looking at those high requests per second. So this was actually prior to the October 7th attack by Hamas. About a month or so before that, we saw a very large attack also on another Israeli government website. And basically what we saw here was a combination. So what we're seeing is combinations now, right? It's not just your standard layer 3, layer 4 DDoS attacks. It's basically your network DDoS attacks and it's your HTTPS attacks, right? What you see here, the attack lasted for over 2 hours, right? And the requests per second were 738,000. That's just a massive amount for any infrastructure to actually be able to, to basically use. Here is basically a European government organization that had a massive attack. This attack was over 48 hours that did fail. That's a very, very long time. Just imagine the security team being up for 3-4 days trying to help protect something like this, right? So that's a massive attack. It basically, it was actually 7 phases, and the longest phase of that attack was 17 hours. This usually we see attacks like we've talked about earlier. I think Christopher was talking about, burst attacks. We see that a lot occurring, burst attacks occurring, but a continuous attack for 17 hours is not seen very often. That's about what. So we saw basically 39 billion packets that basically went through that. So really, what's occurring, right? So this is the shift that we are seeing, right? Number one, the volume of DDoS attacks has actually decreased since 2021 by 50%. However, the amount of attacks has increased, right? And what we're seeing there, are right, that the number of the HTTP attacks has increased by 770%. Very drastic. This is where it's going, right? Why is it going here? They're more complicated. They're harder to detect. They're harder to protect against, right? And going back, I think I'm echoing what you were saying, Christopher. It's going from gigabits per second to basically RPS. This is what we have to really start paying attention to on the request per second of these attacks. Okay, so this is the pattern that we're seeing on the new attacks. Really, really high requests per second, right? The traffic's encrypted. This is the first Achilles heel that we have to, be able to mitigate against, right? We have to be able to actually detect and prevent these attacks from occurring. We actually need to basically be able to decrypt that traffic because we have to look deeper into the traffic. That's the first challenge that we have to protect against this, right? Second thing is that these requests appear legitimate. Traditional DDoS is going to see these attacks and think, hey, this is a legitimate, traffic, right? So that's the next thing we have to be aware of. And they appear so legitimate that even traditional, right? A lot of these attacks are done by botnets. That botnet protection is not providing any protection because it looks legitimate. One of the key things that we look at when a bot's doing an attack is we're looking to see, what kind of user interface. We're trying to look at, what kind of, movement there is. We kind of look at what's in the fields. Traditional bots sometimes put in a lot of, just randomized data. No, the attacks we're seeing now, they're actually the data that's coming in those threads are legitimate. It's a legitimate value that they're putting in there, but they're just doing so much of it that it basically brings down the servers. So traditional DDoS is not going to stop that. Now, I'm not saying we don't need traditional DDoS. We still need it, but this is another factor that we need, right? WAF in itself is not going to stop this because the requests look legitimate, right? If you use rate limiting is a good method for mitigating against this. But the problem with rate limiting alone is that you are not blocking just malicious traffic. You're also blocking legitimate traffic. So that's something you have to be aware of. Do you want to block? Are you okay with blocking some legitimate traffic? Or are you okay with basically, just controlling the amount of traffic coming in and keeping your service up and running? So question is, where's all this, tools are coming from, right? So a lot of people think that the tools are basically, available only on the dark web. Well, the tools are actually available on very common places that most of our organizations use on a regular basis. These 4 are very common DDoS attack tools attacking at the application layer that basically you get from GitHub. You can go to GitHub, actually and download some of these tools and actually start doing some basic DDoS testing, attack testing. One of the things you'll notice is they have a bunch of little, kits already that will say, hey, how do I bypass CDN? How do I bypass, cloud-based Google Cloud or look like a Google Cloud bot? So they have already the tools in place to basically help, bypass some of the security techniques we have today in place, right? And this is all from GitHub. The other thing we see in those Telegram channels is that the attacker groups will actually provide links to download their code so you can actually help and participate in their attacks, right? So that those attacks become larger and harder to basically detect or block, I should say. So what are we doing in order to be able to detect this? So the first thing we have to do, this goes back to understanding the traffic we have today in our organization. We have to baseline. Why is that important? We're not just baselining the amount of traffic. I don't need to know that I have 100 megs of data alone. That alone does not help me because you have flash crowd, right? A days in events in your organization, right? It might be an Amazon Prime Day sale. It might be something like that, that your traffic's going to spike. So just having a bandwidth, statistics doesn't help. What we also need to do is understand the behavior of the application, right? Right? We call that rate invariant, right? So what, how many, I get in a post and then I get a get, then I get basically this field coming in. So those combinations, right? So being able to analyze that. Now we're not doing this, manually because there's too much traffic to be analyzed manually. How we're doing this is actually by using machine learning to learn about the application, learn about the behavior of the application, right? So what does that do for us? Number one, what this allows us is to basically create that baseline. And when we create that baseline, we can see how it deviates. When a certain trigger is hit, we know that something odd is occurring, and we can then analyze it and create a unique signature, right? So this is key. And once the attack goes away, then you want that signature to go away, right? Because signature takes processing power, and you don't want to keep running that processing power while there's no attack occurring. So one of the things we basically see, so what are we doing exactly? So this is an example of a signature that we're able to create, right? So the signature is not just capturing, a couple of fields, right? So when we looked at a UDP, a traditional layer 3, layer 4 attack, we were basically capturing, the time to live of a packet, the size of a packet, right? These are layer 3 fields that are seen when traffic, even if it's encrypted, we could see it in the header. What we're actually doing is looking at the HTTP header, which is usually encrypted in HTTPS communications, and we're basically extrapolating out of there elements within that header that we can actually determine if it is, a legitimate traffic or if it's malicious. So if it matches this signature, we know it's got to be malicious because this is not normal behavior for that traffic. The other thing we could see is at the top there, it says latest real-time signature. Why is that important? Because the attacks morph. They're actually, the tools that they have actually allow it to morph in real time. So maybe this minute it might have this signature. A minute later, a couple of those variables will change, right? So the idea is that this is always adapting to the traffic as it's morphing, right? And being able to accurately detect the traffic. So just to summarize, so what we're basically really want to point out, number one, the motivation has changed. And that actually makes it harder for us because political and religious ideology are actually harder to fight against than ransom type DDoS attacks. Number two, existing technologies, right? If you have some existing technologies, they will help fight some of that, but you actually need to ensure you have your technology stays up to date to be able to protect that. One of the things that Ziv said, which I think is crucial, I go into a lot of calls where customers are being attacked and they're under attack. A lot of customers do not have all the data information at hand. They don't know all their networks that they own in the organization. They don't know all their critical applications, right? They don't know the amount of bandwidth their sites even have, right? So the first step is for us to basically document, collect this information, right? Make sure we have all that knowledge available so that even if we think we have our DDoS protection in place, that basically we have also that information available in the event there is a DDoS attack, and preparing, doing tests, right, to ensure that it all works is crucial to ensure that you're up and running and that the attackers actually can't really bring us down, right? And with that, that's it. Thank you.